Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we have not updated these rookie rankings in quite some time, so I'll be excited to go through and dive into these guys for you. But before we get into it, make sure you drop a like on this video, subscribe if you play Dynasty, and take advantage of the free bet Underdog has on Jalen Hurts for this Super Bowl. More than less than half a total yard. You can find the link in the comment section and the description. When you sign up to Underdog Fantasy with promo code FLOCK, they're going to match your first deposit dollar for dollar up to $100. You will get our 2023 Dynasty rankings and that free bet. So go deposit $10, immediately have 20 in your account, plus our Dynasty rankings, and then go bet the $20 for Jalen Hurts to have more than half a total yard. But I think that should be about it. Let's go through, let's dive into this, and let's just put Bichon Robinson, number one, first tier, only guy in the tier. And instead of talking about how good of a player he is, how much we love him, blah, 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 you've already heard me do that over and over and over again. You've already heard everybody do that for God knows how long now, about, I would say 12 months, but what instead I'd rather do is talk about why he's the only guy in the tier. And the true reason is that I can't see a spot. I can't really see a situation where Bichon Robinson is going at the 102. I think he's almost locked in here. If we had to go worst case scenario, right? Worst case scenario, let's say he falls outside of the first round of the NFL draft, which I think he is going to be a first round pick. And maybe he falls out because he ran a slow 40-yard dash at the NFL Combine. Maybe he's a little bit smaller than we expected. I don't think that's going to be the case, but we're going worst case scenario here. He falls outside of the first round. He then finds himself in a spot where he's going to a team like the Detroit Lions, where maybe he's going to be operating in a committee with DeAndre Swift. That's like the only scenario I could see him falling outside of the number one ranking for almost everybody, regardless of format. And in reality, that's probably not going to happen. He's probably going to be a first-round pick, probably going to go to a spot where he's going to step in as the day one starter. He has the size, he has the receiving skill set, he has the athleticism, and he'll have the NFL draft capital. He'll check every single box you want. But going over to the second tier, it's going to be interesting to see how this progresses going forward. It's going to be Bryce Young, CJ Stroud for me at 2 and 3. And I've talked about this time and time again. This is why, we were able to draft so much Josh Allen back in the day, so much Daniel Jones in his rookie season as well, because I don't sit here and act like I'm some professional scout. I was reading the YouTube comment section the other day, and I read that someone came through and said, you know what? I'm about halfway through the film on Bryce Young, and I think I may like Stroud better. And while it maybe is really fun for you to go through and watch those two players on your TV screen, 100% I could see how that's a fun activity. To sit there and try to evaluate those players based on film and remove their offensive lines, their level of competition, their wide receivers, their coaching staff, their scheme, and everything from that scenario, it's a task that is damn near impossible. It's a task that the Dynasty community overall thinks that they're very good at every year, and in reality, they're very bad at it every season. They're laughing at the Buffalo Bills for taking Josh Allen over Josh Rosen. We've seen this time and time and time again. So I'm not really going to be trying to sit here and say, okay, I think for sure this quarterback's better. What I'm going to be looking at is the draft capital that goes into these two players, their rushing upside, and the situation they're stepping into. And we're looking at the rushing upside of a Bryce Young and CJ Stroud and say, you know what? Neither of them are Anthony Richardson. Neither of them are going to be going out there and giving you 30 rushing yards a game and providing a ton of fantasy value in that category. So that's kind of going to be a wash. So I'm kind of just going to be looking at the draft capital in the landing spot. If you end up having, say, CJ Stroud go number one overall, say the Indianapolis Colts trade up to get him, not saying it's going to happen, but hypothetical here, and then Bryce Young falls down to, say, the Raiders at 7, then we'll have CJ Stroud ranked ahead of Bryce Young. Vice versa happens, we'll have him ranked opposite. So at this time, I'm sorry, it's kind of difficult for me to pick a guy here. I'm just going to be tossing my hands in the air and say, let's wait it out. Let's let the NFL make this decision for us. There's obviously a scenario where we decide that the draft capital doesn't matter too much. Like, say Bryce Young goes to the Houston Texans at number 2 overall, and then you end up having CJ Stroud go to the Seattle Seahawks at 5. If we think the Seattle Seahawks is a significantly better landing spot, then maybe from a fantasy perspective, you'd rather go with the quarterback that ends up there. But in reality, at this moment, these guys look the same to me. Now, going over to our next tier, we're going to have Jahmyr Gibbs at 4. Gibbs, we've talked about it time and time again. What is going to matter here is the size at the NFL Combine. If he comes in with the BMI of 27.8, right in line with James Cook, not going to be great. I'll tell you right now, Jahmyr Gibbs would be moving down our rankings in a heartbeat, because at that point he would profile to be someone that is not going to be seeing work in the red zone. Instead, he will exclusively be involved as a pass catcher, and you don't really want a Nyheim Hines. You don't want a JD McKissic being drafted in the top 5 picks of your Dynasty rookie draft. But instead, if he comes with a BMI around 29.5, about 30, then, I think that we can say he'll safely have that role in the red zone, and it'll look a lot more like Aaron Jones and a lot more like DeAndre Swift with his profile. So we've talked about it before. That's what's going to matter. JSN at 5, we've talked about this a ton as well. I don't think we need to talk about it any more than we have. The man's dominant against Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, his sophomore year. The one game without those two guys, he posts 350 receiving yards in a single bowl game against Utah. He's phenomenal. He's very good against man. He's very good against zone. Breaks out at an early age against top competition. He dominates. I have no questions. He's my wide receiver 1 in this class. It sucks that he got hurt this past year. It would have been interesting to see what he could have done. And yet again, another loaded Ohio State wide receiver room. But the man is just so damn good. Now, dropping down to our next tier, we are actually going to be going with Jordan Addison at 6. I've been warming up to Jordan Addison a bit here. With Addison, we always look at market share numbers. I think looking at overall totals usually skews data a bit. And with Addison, if you're looking at market share numbers, he wasn't good at USC this past season. While it was a phenomenal offense, while he was good, in terms of how he impacted the game, it's not like he was Treylon Burks. It's not like he was Chris Olave. It's not like he was just dominating with 35 to 40% of his team's receiving yards on a per game basis. And even in 2021 at Pitt, it's not like he was dominating for 40% of the offense there either. Now, what we can say is, while that market share number was a little bit lower, it was closer in line to someone like a Quentin Johnson. It was such a good Pitt offense back in 2021 that it's hard to just say, okay, he had bad market share numbers, so we should hold that against him. He had 17 touchdowns. He had 1,600 receiving yards in 14 games played. So while usually we don't like to look at those overall totals, while we like to try to take into account the context, the offense that player's playing in, it's hard to do much better than that. The man was dominating. He wins the Biletnikoff as a sophomore, so I am warming up to him. 7 and 8, we're going to have Will Levis and Anthony Richardson. At this point, I think that it is a little bit of a toss-up. If we're going to be looking at NFL mock draft database, they currently have Will Levis as a borderline top 5 pick, possibly going to the Colts at 4. They have Anthony Richardson hovering in the middle of the first round. You have a lot of mock drafts where he's going to be going over to Washington. And I'll say, if Richardson sneaks in to be a top 10 pick in the NFL draft, he will be higher than this in these rankings. If we're pulling up the rushing upside that you are going to get with an Anthony Richardson, it is through the roof. At Florida, this man in 12 games played had 654 rushing yards. He had 9 rushing touchdowns. He's a very good quarterback from a rushing perspective. If he goes as a top 10 NFL draft pick, indicating that he 100% has that job security, is going to be a starter at the NFL level for the next few years. That's a player that we can get very excited about. At this point, we're going to give Will Levis the slight nod, however, because NFL mock drafters are just telling us that he's going to be going significantly higher, and I don't want to have another Malik Willis situation where we had Malik Willis as our quarterback 1 before the NFL draft this past year, given his rushing upside, and then he ends up plummeting down boards. Now, our last guy on the tier will be Quentin Johnson, which is a little funny because we're looking at NFL draft capital, which I'll say matters a lot more for me with running back and quarterback than it does at wide receiver and tight end. And right now, you have a lot of mock drafters saying Quentin Johnston's actually going to be the number 1 wide receiver off the board in this year's NFL draft. I found time and time again that it seems like these tall, alpha, stud-looking wide receivers like Courtland Sutton, like Mike Williams, like Michael Pittman, kind of always overvalued. People see that big-bodied guy that maybe can provide more real-life value than he can provide fantasy value because he's not going to command a ton of volume, and they love to go out there and put him at number 1 overall. So I'm willing to just go based off production, which we've shown time and time again with our model is a significantly better indicator combined with other key metrics for NFL and, more importantly, fantasy football success. And that's why I'm going to be taking a JSN. That's why I'm going to be taking a Jordan Addison over Johnston. But now dropping down to our next tier, I will say this is the big teardrop. I would like to say, let's do a double teardrop here. Maybe you end up getting like a Zach Charbonnet sneaking his way up and going into the Addison tier, dependent on landing spot, dependent on NFL combine, dependent on NFL draft capital. This point's very difficult seeing that happen. I will say with a lot of these running backs that we're talking about, very interested to see their official size and testing numbers. But one major box that you're getting from someone like Zach Charbonnet, not only does it look like he has the size to be a 3-down player, we'll confirm at the NFL Combine. He's going to have the size, don't worry. But at the same time, the man was a great pass catcher this final season. His final season at UCLA, 37 receptions in 10 games played. It's 3.7 receptions per game, 32 receiving yards per game. That's why he's going to be my running back 3. That's why we're going to have him at the top of this tier, because I see almost a poor man's Bichon Robinson in that you have the size, you have the passing down ability. I really do want to see the athleticism, which will lead to that NFL draft capital, of course. Now let's go over to our next guy, Bichon Robinson, who, I mean, has had a lot going on this offseason. We'll put it that way. I mean, with Robinson, this was a Devi superstar where going to LSU in 2020, this was a player that so many people were so damn excited about. Keep in mind, he goes to an LSU roster that is absolutely stacked. In 2020, you have Joe Burrow getting drafted, but you still had Jamar Chase, I guess, in the room. Not really playing. Remember, Jamar Chase did sit out. But the most important thing we're looking at, he's a 5-star prospect. He's the number 1 prospect in Louisiana, the number 2 wide receiver prospect in the country. So he's been a Devi darling for a very long time, and he broke out right away his freshman season at LSU, averaging 73 receiving yards per game, and he improved his sophomore year, averaging closer to about 90 receiving yards per game. Took a major step back this past season, has some off-the-field stuff going on. Right now, if we're going to be looking at NFL mock draft database, he's supposed to be a mid-second round pick. I think this is a player that a lot of people are excited about the ceiling that he has. But it seems like more times than not, these Devi wide receivers that end up disappointing and living off of high school pedigree almost, seems like they're usually overvalued. Now, speaking of people who are usually overvalued, time and time again, rookie tight ends, the worst values in fantasy. Michael Mayer, though, very good prospects, and I will have him here and almost a guarantee that he will fall behind a couple other rookie running backs at some point. Now, that point's going to be after the NFL Combine. We have a much better idea about these prospect profiles, a much better idea about the size and where they should end up in the NFL Draft. Until that time, I'm going to rank him here just because, hell, it's a very safe spot. The man had 800 receiving yards at Notre Dame this final season, declaring after his junior year. Should be a good athlete. Should have the size. Should be a first-round pick. It's a very safe pick. Obviously, you don't like investing into rookie tight ends, but we'll have more clarity on the running backs later on this offseason, where we'll be able to probably discount the safety we're getting with ranking Meyer here at this point and instead pivot over to some rookie running backs. Now, our next guy we're going to be looking at will be Josh Downs. Very similar situation, where Downs, at this point, I'm assuming that he's going to be penciled in to be a second-round pick in the NFL Draft. Phenomenal production profile, 2021 at North Carolina, where he has over 100 receiving yards per game, dominates the market share at North Carolina. Very exciting, obviously. Had some pretty good quarterback play. But still, at the same time, really like the player. Now, what will be interesting is he's not going to have all the NFL draft capital in the world. Going to be a little bit undersized. Going to be operating a little more so as a slot guy. But I kind of like going after that prototype at a discount compared to that Alpha X super tall guy that fits the usual profile that people are looking for, where they may not command as much volume. Give me the little smaller guy. Give me the guy that's going to get the volume at the NFL level, because that's going to be the guy that scores the fantasy points. Now, our final 3 players here, Sean Tucker, Zach Evans, and Devin Achane, they all have their own things going on. We will have so much more clarity after the NFL Combine. Sean Tucker, great athlete, track star, great pass catcher. Zach Evans, hyper efficient running back. Devin, great pass catcher. I mean, competed with Isaiah Spiller at a younger age and was probably a much better player at the time, but is going to have his own size concerns. So when we get the NFL Combine numbers for the size and testing numbers for these guys, they can be big-time risers. I'm not going to be too surprised if Zach Evans ends up moving into being a top 10 player in these rankings. But at this time, when we're looking at incomplete information with these running back prospect profiles, I will be leaning a little bit more with the safer options, guys like a Michael Mayer, someone like a Josh Downs, where we know what the floor is kind of going to be like at the end of the process. But I think that's all we got for this video. So, of course, if you enjoyed it, go down there, drop a like, subscribe if you play Dynasty, and make sure you're taking advantage of what we have on Underdog with a free Jalen Hurts bet. When you sign up with promo code FLOCK, they're also going to match your first deposit dollar for dollar up to $100, and you will get our 2023 Dynasty rankings. But thank you. Appreciate you. Hope you have a great day, and hope we get to see you with the video tomorrow.